The sound of my 6-month-old daughter's labored breathing filled the sterile hospital room as I held her tiny, swollen body against my chest. Amelia's kidneys had failed completely 3 weeks ago, and the doctors had given me an ultimatum that shattered my world into a million pieces. Find $12,000 for her next round of dialysis treatments within the month, or watch my baby girl slip away from me forever. I stared down at her pale, almost translucent skin, her little fingers wrapped around mine with what felt like the last of her strength, and made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my days. I would give up everything, including food itself, to save her life. Before I continue with what became the most devastating month of my life, I want to reach out to everyone watching this video. Please, if my story touches your heart, hit that like button. It means more to me than you'll ever know. Subscribe to this channel because sharing these real, raw stories helps us all feel less alone in our struggles. And please comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your world right now. Your presence here, your willingness to witness my pain and hopefully find some strength in it, means everything to me. If you have any advice, any words of encouragement, please share them. I'm praying for each and every one of you as you take this journey with me, and I want you to know that your support has been the light in my darkest hours. Thank you for standing with me when I couldn't stand on my own. My name is Christina Vale and I'm a 24-year-old single mother from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. 3 years ago I thought I had my life figured out. I was working as a dental hygienist, making decent money, and planning a future with Amelia's father, Trevor. But life has a way of crumbling everything you think you know in a single moment. Trevor left when I was 7 months pregnant, emptying our joint savings account and disappearing into the night like our love had never existed. The pregnancy complications started immediately after the stress of his abandonment, and Amelia was born premature at 32 weeks with severe kidney dysplasia. The medical bills started piling up before I even brought her home. My insurance covered some costs, but the specialized treatments, the constant monitoring, the emergency visits, it all added up to amounts that made my head spin. I sold my car first, then my jewelry, then everything of value I owned. I moved us into a 1-bedroom apartment in the cheapest part of town, where the walls were thin and the heat barely worked. But none of that mattered as long as Amelia was fighting. By the time she was 5 months old, I had exhausted every resource. I'd applied for every grant, every assistance program, every charity that might help. Some provided temporary relief, but it was never enough. The hospital's financial aid office became my second home, and I knew every social worker by name. They all looked at me with the same mixture of pity and helplessness. They wanted to help, but the system simply wasn't designed to save babies like mine. When Dr. Patricia Holloway, Amelia's nephrologist, sat me down in her office that cold February morning, I knew by the look in her eyes that my worst fears were about to become reality. She explained that Amelia's kidney function had deteriorated beyond what they had hoped, and she would need intensive dialysis treatments that weren't covered by my insurance. The cost would be $12,000 up front, with ongoing expenses that would likely reach $50,000 over the next 6 months. I remember staring at her, my mind completely blank as she continued talking about payment plans and the hospital's policies. All I could think about was Amelia's face when she smiled at me that morning, the way her eyes lit up when I sang to her, the tiny sound she made when she was content. How could I possibly come up with that kind of money? I was already working 16-hour days, picking up every shift I could get, and I was barely making rent. That night, I sat in our cramped apartment, holding Amelia as she slept fitfully in my arms. Her breathing was getting more labored and I could see the fluid retention in her tiny limbs. I had exactly $347 in my bank account, and rent was due in 6 days. I made a list of everything I could possibly sell, but even if I sold every stick of furniture, every piece of clothing, every possession we owned, I wouldn't come close to what I needed. It was then that I made the decision that would nearly kill me. I would stop eating. Every dollar I would have spent on food would go into Amelia's medical fund. I calculated that if I could survive on just water and whatever scraps I could find, I could save approximately $400 a month on groceries. It wasn't much, but it was something. I also started working a third job, cleaning offices at night after my regular shifts. The first day wasn't too bad. I told myself I was just fasting, that people did it all the time for religious or health reasons. I focused on Amelia, on keeping her comfortable, on researching every possible funding source I might have missed. I called distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, begging for help. Most hung up on me, but a few sent small amounts, $20 here, $50 there. Every penny went into the fund. By the third day, the hunger pangs were constant. My stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside out. I was lightheaded and weak, but I pushed through. I had to. When Amelia looked at me with those trusting eyes, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. I started drinking more water to fill the empty space in my stomach, and I chewed on ice cubes to trick my body into thinking it was getting something. The first time I ate toilet paper was on day 7. I know how it sounds, how crazy and desperate it must seem, but I was delirious with hunger, and I had read somewhere that people in extreme situations had survived on paper products. The single-ply toilet paper dissolved in my mouth like tissue, and while it didn't provide any nutrition, it gave me something to chew, something to fill the aching void in my stomach. My coworkers started noticing. Angela, one of the other hygienists, kept asking if I was okay. She brought me lunch several times, but I always made excuses. I wasn't hungry, I was trying a new diet I had eaten earlier. The lies came easily because the alternative was admitting that I was slowly starving myself to save my dying daughter. How do you explain that kind of desperation to someone who's never lived it? By day 10 I was barely functioning. My hands shook constantly and I had to grip the dental instruments tighter to keep them steady. I was making mistakes at work, small ones that I managed to cover up, but I knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. My boss, Dr. Raymond Chen, called me into his office and asked if everything was all right at home. I lied again, told him I was just tired from the baby keeping me up at night. The toilet paper became a regular part of my routine. I would tear off small pieces and eat them slowly, trying to make them last. I discovered that if I wet them slightly, they were easier to swallow. I started carrying small pieces in my pockets, eating them in bathroom stalls when the hunger became unbearable. I knew it was probably harmful, but I also knew that if I collapsed from hunger I wouldn't be able to work, and then there would be no money at all for Amelia. Amelia was getting worse. Her color was off and she was sleeping more than usual. The dialysis appointments were becoming more frequent, and each one cost money I didn't have. I started paying in small installments, promising the hospital billing department that I would have the rest soon. They were patient with me, but I could see the concern in their eyes. They knew, as I did, that time was running out. On day 12 I fainted at work. I was cleaning a patient's teeth when the room suddenly started spinning, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor with Angela and Dr. Chen hovering over me. They insisted on taking me to the emergency room, but I couldn't afford the cost of an ER visit. I convinced them I was just dehydrated and needed to go home and rest. That night I called my sister Patricia in Denver. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since our mother's funeral, but I was desperate. I swallowed my pride and told her everything. About Amelia's condition, about the money I needed, about what I was doing to myself. She was silent for a long time and then she started crying. She said she wished she could help, but she was going through her own financial crisis after her husband's layoff. The worst part wasn't the physical hunger, though that was agony. It was the mental fog that came with starvation. I started forgetting things, appointments, conversations, where I put my keys. I was terrified that I would make a mistake with Amelia's medications or miss something important about her condition. I started writing everything down, keeping detailed notes about her symptoms, her eating schedule, her medication times. Day 15 brought a new low. I was so weak that I could barely lift Amelia, and she seemed to sense something was wrong. She would stare at me with those big worried eyes, as if she was trying to figure out why her mama wasn't acting right. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror that day and barely recognized myself. My cheeks were hollow, my eyes sunken, and my lips were cracked and pale. I looked like a ghost of the woman I used to be. The toilet paper had become my main source of sustenance. I had learned to eat it in small amounts throughout the day, washing it down with water. I told myself it was temporary, that once I had the money for Amelia's treatment, I would start eating real food again. I just had to hold on a little longer. On day 16, Dr. Holloway called me into her office again. Amelia's latest test results were worse than expected, and she needed to start dialysis immediately. The treatments would cost $3,000 every other day, and they would need to continue for at least 2 weeks. I sat there listening to her explain the urgency of the situation, and I felt my world collapsing around me. I had managed to save $1,200 in the past 2 weeks, but it wasn't nearly enough. I begged Dr. Holloway to start the treatments anyway, promising I would find a way to pay. She looked at me with such compassion, and I could see that she was struggling with the hospital's policies as much as I was. She agreed to begin the treatments immediately, giving me a week to come up with the first payment. That night I made the hardest decision of my life. I would sell my blood plasma twice a week, which would bring in an additional $200. I would also sign up for every medical study I could find, even the risky ones. I was willing to put my own life on the line if it meant saving Amelia's. Day 17 was the day everything changed. I had been surviving on toilet paper and water for over 2 weeks, and my body was shutting down. I was at the hospital with Amelia for her first dialysis session when I collapsed in the waiting room. This time there was no hiding what was happening to me. The emergency room doctors ran tests and immediately figured out what I had been doing to myself. The social worker, Mrs. Eleanor Park, sat beside my hospital bed and listened as I told her everything. She didn't judge me or lecture me about the dangers of what I was doing. Instead, she held my hand and told me that she was going to help me find another way. She made phone calls, filled out forms, and worked tirelessly to find resources I didn't know existed. Within hours, she had connected me with a foundation that specifically helped families dealing with pediatric kidney disease. They agreed to cover 80% of Amelia's treatment costs, and the hospital agreed to write off the remaining 20%. For the first time in months, I cried tears of relief instead of despair. But the damage was done. The weeks of starvation had taken a toll on my body that would take months to recover from. More importantly, the stress and malnutrition had affected my milk supply, and I was no longer able to breastfeed Amelia. The guilt was overwhelming. In trying to save her life, I had deprived her of the nutrition she needed from me. The treatments began immediately, and for a few days, it seemed like Amelia was responding well. Her color improved and she seemed more alert. I started eating real food again, though my stomach could only handle small amounts at first. I thought we had turned a corner, that my sacrifice had been worth it. But Amelia's body had been weakened by months of illness, and the delay in treatment had taken its toll. On a quiet Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after her treatments began, Dr. Holloway called me into her office one final time. Amelia's kidneys had suffered irreversible damage, and her tiny body was too weak to continue fighting. I held my daughter as she took her last breath, singing the same lullaby I had sung to her every night since she was born. She died peacefully in my arms, looking up at me with those beautiful, trusting eyes that had given me strength through the darkest period of my life. The funeral was small, attended by a few co-workers and the hospital staff who had grown to love Amelia during her frequent visits. Mrs. Park stood beside me as they lowered the tiny white casket into the ground, and I realized that my desperate attempts to save her had failed. The money I had scraped together, the food I had given up, the toilet paper I had eaten, none of it had been enough. I spent the following weeks in a haze of grief and guilt. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have been different if I had found the money sooner, if I had been stronger, if I had made different choices. The what-ifs consumed me, and I found myself unable to eat even when food was available. The medical bills continued to arrive in the mail, a cruel reminder of my failure. I had destroyed my health and nearly killed myself, and for what? My beautiful daughter was gone, and I was left with nothing but debt and the memory of her final moments. Mrs. Park continued to check on me, bringing groceries and making sure I was eating. She helped me apply for grief counseling and connected me with other parents who had lost children to kidney disease. Their stories were heartbreaking, but they also reminded me that I wasn't alone in my pain. Months later, I still struggle with the guilt and the grief. I've learned to eat again, though food still doesn't taste the same. I've gone back to work, though I find myself staring at empty chairs in the waiting room where Amelia and I used to sit. I've moved to a smaller apartment, unable to bear living in the place where she took her first steps and said her first words. The toilet paper incident haunts me still. Sometimes I catch myself looking at it in the store, remembering the desperation that drove me to eat it, the way it felt dissolving in my mouth while my daughter fought for her life in the next room. It's a reminder of how far a parent will go for their child, and how sometimes, even the most extreme sacrifices aren't enough. I share this story not for sympathy, but as a testament to the love between a parent and child. I would do it all again, every day of starvation, every piece of toilet paper, every moment of agony, if it meant even one more day with Amelia. She was my world, my reason for living, and losing her has left a void that nothing will ever fill. To other parents facing impossible choices, I want you to know that you're not alone. The healthcare system is broken and families like mine fall through the cracks every day. But there are people like Mrs. Park, like Dr. Holloway, like the foundation workers who fight for children like Amelia. Don't give up hope and don't sacrifice your health the way I did. There are resources available and there are people who care. Amelia would have been 2 years old next month. I visit her grave every week, bringing fresh flowers and telling her about my day. I tell her that I love her, that I'm sorry I couldn't save her, and that I will carry her memory with me for the rest of my life. She was the strongest person I've ever known, and though she's gone, the love she gave me during her short life continues to sustain me. I still keep a small piece of toilet paper in my wallet, a reminder of the lengths I went to for love. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's part of our story, mine and Amelia's. It represents the desperation of a mother's love, the failure of systems that should protect our most vulnerable, and the tragic reality that sometimes love isn't enough to save the ones we treasure most. This is my story, our story, and though it doesn't have a happy ending, it's filled with the deepest love a human heart can hold. Amelia taught me that love isn't measured in days or years, but in the intensity of feeling, in the willingness to sacrifice everything for another person's well-being. She was my daughter for only 18 months, but she was my everything and I will love her until my last breath. If you're watching this and you're struggling, please know that you matter. Your story matters. Your pain is valid and your love is real. Thank you for witnessing my journey, for standing with me in my darkest hour, and for helping me honor my daughter's memory by sharing her story with the world. May we all find the strength to keep going even when the path ahead seems impossible to walk.